Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome to episode 25 of the Convo podcast. Today we've got a very exciting and hopefully, inshallah, quite informative as well as moving discussion. We're talking about the Qur'an, and we've titled it today, The Language of Miracles, God's Word in a Godless World. So we're going to be exploring the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're going to be exploring various dimensions of it, but primarily we're going to be honing in on its miraculous nature. It's a revelation. It's something that's come from the heavens into our dunya, right? And that is quite incredible if we can wrap our minds around it. So we're going to try and do that today, inshallah. And we've got with us a very, very special guest. He is a dear brother of ours, Brother Usman Malik. And he joins us today to discuss this particular matter. He's been a teacher for 12 years now, has extensive experience. He specializes in studies of religion, and he also teaches business studies. He's got a Bachelor of Business and Accounting with a sub-major in company law. And he's got a particular passion for the language of the Qur'an, and he's spoken about it. He's given talks and lectures on it in various community and youth settings. He's also quite the sportsman. He's got a particular interest in cricket as well as swimming. But I'll hand it over to Sufyan. We can start off our discussion.
Yep, barakallahu feekum. And welcome from myself to yourself, Usman. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone in the live audience, for joining us tonight. Inshallah, will be a riveting episode. A topic that, as my co-host Hamza has said, is close to many of our hearts. So what we want to do, inshallah, is we want to start off by talking about the Quran as a miracle, but put the question in context. It is a book that was revealed to a particular people. It was revealed to all of mankind, but it was revealed in a particular time, place, context. So let's start with that first. Brother, if you can tell us a little bit about that, the incident of the revelation of the Quran and the people to whom it was physically revealed.
Sure. First of all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure being on. And I'm really excited, having this opportunity to share my reflection and my journey towards, trying to understand the miraculous nature of this speech. So before we begin, let's just establish the setting. So the Quran, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا عَرَبِيًّا لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. This Arabic recital was revealed to the Quraysh. And the Quraysh, we all know their command of the Arabic language was amazing, right? And the Arabic that was prevalent during the time and pre-Islamic days, even before the advent of Rasulullah ﷺ, was something to marvel, really. The literature, the control of the Arabic language and the expression of the Arabic language was absolutely phenomenal. And to truly understand this, we'll dig into a little bit of what type of Arabic what type of Arabic they were involved in, and what's the main differences between the Arabic that was spoken and expressed during that time and Fusha Arabic and spoken Arabic. Because we often relate, or we often assign Quranic Arabic to something that's Fusha or that's formal. But in reality, we're going to explore just the different kind of levels of Arabic there is, to get a greater context in terms of, how exceptional the marvel of the Arabic language in the Quran truly was.
So just quick question on that. So was the language that the Quraysh possessed and that they were really, really good at, was that like, in terms of its style, its delivery, its sort of, its foundational, sort of features, you could say, was that the same as the Quran, or was there some difference, or was it like the same thing? Or how could you describe that?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Let's start off with a little hierarchy of the types of Arabic we have, just really briefly.
Yeah.
So inshallah, first you have like spoken Arabic, right? So spoken or slang Arabic, which you can find spoken, just on the streets or in conversation in the Arab countries or amongst, those who speak Arabic within families, right?
What about here? Like if you go to 𝗧𝗵𝗲, for example, would you classify that as the same kind, or is that different?
Yeah, well, it depends in terms of what generation you're talking about. If you're talking about our generation, normally it's predominantly slang with maybe aspects of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 in it.
Okay.
But I think if you want an example of 𝗧𝗵𝗲, would be looking at formal TV shows, formal media, and then obviously maybe conversation Arabic for those who came from a previous generation.
Yeah.
And then obviously with 𝗧𝗵𝗲, and Brother Sufyan, you can always add in as well. You have more kind of organized structure. You have more organization between the sentences, and you have a more of a formalized kind of approach to that. So that's 𝗧𝗵𝗲. All right. Now, ancient Arabic and 𝗧𝗵𝗲, there's a world of difference, and this is where the jump can be really seen in terms of the control, the coherence, the organization, the symmetry of Arabic that's found in ancient Arabic far surpasses, the Arabic which we assign to normal 𝗧𝗵𝗲. And
Really? So even now, our formal Arabic now, the 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Arabic, that pales in comparison to how it was with the Arabs at the time of Rasulullah.
Absolutely. And what I want to quickly do, I'll take this opportunity to explain why it became so refined. See, language is an expression of a human being.
Yeah.
And this expression is directly influenced by our external environment. Yeah. So the fact that the pre-Islamic Arabs were geographically isolated, it kind of was a perfect cultivating grounds for this language and this expression to refine itself. Because if you look at the evolution of language, it's directly related to a geographical evolution of people, right? As you spread, you mix with different cultures, you have different communities, then the Arabic...
It becomes like adulterated over time.
Absolutely.
I guess that's also why then you have, even in 𝗧𝗵𝗲, you've got, well, I assume in 𝗧𝗵𝗲, could be wrong, different dialects and things for different regions, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. We all know the different dialects, the use of the letter 𝗏 and the omission of some letters, etc. So that's the first reason why the Arabic was refined for years and years and years. The second reason is quite interesting, and that's got to do with the external environment. And you might say, how? Well, the Arabs had a very kind of like a dull, very simple external environment. There wasn't much going on. There was pretty much just sand, the odd oasis. A lot of sand, the odd oasis. And that really meant that they expressed themselves in a lot of imagery. And the distinguishing quality between ancient Arabic and 𝗧𝗵𝗲, there's many, but we'll touch on just one, is the use of imagery in language. And that's a result of the external environment. And so we know that from kids, we're all teachers, the more external stimuli the mind has, the less creative it actually becomes. So, the external environment had a profound impact on the Arabs expressing themselves very, very visually and with a lot of imagery. And I want to share one example, inshallah, just to convey what I mean. Okay, so we have a conversation between a husband and a wife. And this is ancient Arabic, right? So is this
like a recorded actual historical conversation?
So this is the examples that they give in the books of Arabic, and for those who try to understand ancient Arabic, because ancient Arabic is a tool for understanding the Qur'an, right? And so we'll get into that after. So the example as follows. You may have heard this. So the husband claims to the wife that, I'm very generous. And the wife says, how are you generous? We have absolutely nothing in the house.
Yeah.
And then his reply is an example of, how they really communicate with one another. It's just like, in Egypt is known as the land of the Qadis, right? You have the great 𝗵𝗲 coming from there. And then you have the odd people in the street, mashallah, reciting so magnificently. So the same thing here, you had the average husband and wife, just speaking absolutely mind-blowing poetry. So the wife says, we have nothing.
Yeah.
The husband's reply was, a house on top of a hill does not get along with rain. So he's recited that in some sort
Wait, let me think about that for a second.
So I want the audience to imagine it, because like I said, there's a lot of imagery. A house on top of a hill, right, does not get along with a lot of rain. Okay. So what he's trying to communicate is the rain is a metaphor for the ni'mat of Allah, right, falling down. And the house being on top of a hill is an expression of his status, elevated status, in that when the ni'mat do fall, right, they won't, if you're on top of the hill,
you don't catch a lot of them.
Okay. And it'll naturally fall down to the people in the valley, right? So he's saying, yes, we have nothing, but the reason is because whenever I receive something from the bounties of Allah, I pass them down to the less fortunate. So that's an example of how they used to just communicate, a casual conversation.
We should give that a shot these days. So everyone should go and say to their wives that, we're really generous, and see how the conversation goes.
And then the answer can just be, a house on top of the hill doesn't get along with rain.
And that's it, and see where it goes.
Absolutely.
There's also in a lot of the hadith and some ayat of the Qur'an as well, obviously that imagery comes through, like where Prophet ﷺ will speak about date stalks, or like a single fiber off a date stalk to describe something to do with Islam or a blessing, or and similarly, like I can't remember exactly, but it's as if you're passing something through a needle or passing something through hair. There's a lot of imagery like that to do with the landscape, the geographical landscape.
Yeah.
That's the one. What was it? Say it again.
So what I can recall of it is the chances of entering paradise was as small as a camel passing through the eye of a needle.
Exactly. SubhanAllah. Yeah.
And even, I forget the exact references now, but even the needle and the camel had specific contextual realities that demonstrated their sort of the power of using them specifically in those examples.
Absolutely. And there's just one more comment on that. See, ancient Arabic is, like I said earlier, it's the tool for our scholars to unlock the deeper meanings of the Qur'an. And I'll give you one example so the audience can also understand. See, the Qur'an was revealed in an Arabic which was most in line with the Arabic of the Bedouins, the most traditional type of Arabic. Now, if you look at early tafsir, even 200 or 300 years after the Prophet ﷺ, you have in the commentary, when scholars are engaging in discourse and trying to figure out what a certain word means, they have, like, to understand a certain word, they might say, قال العرب. So you have, and like say, what did the Arabs think of this? And the Mufassirin themselves were Arab. So what do they mean by, okay, the Arabs meant it this way? They themselves are Arab. So they're talking about
The OG Arabs.
Yeah, the OG Arabs. So they're talking really about how did the Bedouins really understand this word in the context of the true meaning. So ancient Arabic is, it's a tool that puts a deeper understanding of the Quran together. It's amazing.
I guess from that we can, that gives us sort of the foundation from which to then ask, okay, well, how then do we understand the Quran, right? We understand that the Quran is miraculous, but how do we sort of link the understanding that you've just explained with regards to the language and the depth and the sort of the substance that it has? How can that then be tied into that concept of a miracle? Like how does the Quran establish itself as a miracle in terms of the concept of a miracle? And what would its purpose then be?
Yeah, great question. We're very familiar with the Quran being a book of hudan, guidance, shifa, rahmah, it's a nurun mubin. But have we, so this is the part that really excites me, and it really kind of, it's a catalyst for further exploration. We often call and ascribe the Quran as a miracle. But, what purpose does a miracle serve, and what are the effects of a miracle on a person? And then can we take those same effects and say that the Quran is a miracle? So, informally, we all know what a miracle is. It's something that makes your jaw drop, right? But formally, like, a miracle would be something that defies the laws of, human beings and the laws of the universe. Something that's, not within the parameters of what we expect to be in the capability.
Like the reality of our dunya and our world and everything.
Absolutely. Often there's no rational or logical explanation for that. And then the objective of, whatever's been shown in that miracle is to provide irrefutable evidence to back up what it's trying to prove. So that's the key word here, irrefutable evidence after witnessing. So that's truly that's one way we can understand what a miracle is, I guess.
Yeah, so it's about sort of establishing the truth, like the unquestionable truth of something.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what then of the Quran? What's the link that we can then say, okay, well, you've got a book, and I think this is also part of the discussion about book, speech, which do we consider the Quran? But the Quran, book, speech, however you want to, classify it, and I guess you can give us some insight into that. How can that be classified as a miracle? Because, okay, let's say, Musa alayhi salam comes, sea is split in half, you see these miraculous things, people rise from the dead, moon being split, all that kind of business, right? And you think, wow, this is mind-blowing.
Sure.
And then you've got speech. How does that measure up? How do we say that in fact is a miracle?
Yeah, so look, the Quran, it prides itself in being a miracle, a unique miracle in one or two ways, which I'll just point out. Number one, the nature of the Quran's miracle is distinct, where previous miracles were normally, observed by the eye or the faculty of sight. Like you mentioned, Musa alayhi salam, splitting of the sea, his hand being, full of light. Whereas this miracle is very distinct, and because it's in the form of speech, right? And then, so one of the striking qualities of this miracle is, and the contrast between the Quran as a miracle and previous miracles is that previous miracles were, so when a messenger used to come to their people, the external miracle used to be the evidence to authenticate the book. So I'll give you an example.
Gotcha.
So when Isa AlIslam comes and he says, 𝗧𝗵𝗶 𝗟𝗚𝗀𝗧 so I've come to you with clear signs, and he says, إِنِّي أَخْلُقُ لَكُم مِّنَ الطِّينِ كَهَيْئَةِ الطَّيْرِ فَأَنفُخُ فِيهِ فَيَكُونُ طَيْرًا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. So when he says, I'm going to create a bird, a pigeon out of clay, I'm going to breathe in it, and then it'll become real. When he heals the blind, the leper, and when he basically gives life to the dead, all those external miracles are to authenticate the Injil.
Yes,
but the Quran, on the other hand, subhanAllah, this is amazing. The Quran, on the other hand, does not need an external miracle.
Yeah,
that's right, Sufyan. As you mentioned, it's both the miracle and the book in one.
That's pretty mind blowing.
That's absolutely just it opens up again the next question as well, like why is it a miracle, which we'll go into. So sorry, as far as speech is concerned,
because I'm just trying to wrap my head around. Like, think about it from the sort of regular Joe's perspective, right?
Which is my perspective. I classify myself.
Same with us all. But if someone, I don't know, what's something crazy and miraculous that someone can do right in front of my eyes? I don't know, if someone moves their hand around and they bring something about out of thin air, I don't know. They produce a flower or a cricket bat, whatever, right? They do that in front of my eyes. I'm going to be wowed, right? Presuming it's no trickery and whatever. But then if someone comes and speaks to me in a phenomenally eloquent way, then, I don't know, maybe it's because we don't sort of have that capacity of Arabic and we kind of need that to appreciate it. But that's why we sort of raised the question, how can speech be to the same degree of miracle, so to speak, as things that you could say, see with your own eyes?
Of course. Like firstly, speech. I think number one, speech is often really underrated. Like speech is so powerful. The start of guidance was marked by a speech. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. And then, عَلَّمَهُ الْبَيَانِ. Like bayan is something which expression that Allah has taught us it's something that we must seek to improve. And we have to remember that speech and bayan is the kind of path to access divine guidance, right? It's through bayan that the Creator has spoken to us. And finally, it was marked by the start of, it marked the start of guidance, and now it's ended, the final guidance with a perfect speech. So I want to say the human brain simply cannot organize speech in such a profound, conscious manner. Like, we can use a simple example. If we were to transcribe the entire podcast, right, and then translate that into writing, and then critically analyze our structure, right, our sentence structure.
It would be a bit all over the place at times.
That's right. And, down to a sentence level, there'll be enormous mistakes. Down to a structural level, there'll be enormous mistakes. So the human mind simply does not and cannot organize speech over such a long time. And, what blows me away is speech over 23 years.
Yeah, that's...
Over 23 years. And I want to just remind the audience, I think maybe we should have pointed this out. So Qur'an, guys, the Qur'an is speech, right? So the Qur'an is speech. It's a recital. And that makes it exponentially harder to... so the implications are such that it makes it exponentially more miraculous, that you're able to speak in such an articulate way. So inshallah, so that's the claim the Qur'an is making, that this speech is beyond human capabilities. And we're going to explore why, inshallah, why this speech...
There's, just while you guys were talking, I was just thinking about, subhanAllah, there's a beautiful hadith which actually brings together so much of what we're saying, where, Hamza, you were talking about someone conjures something. I suppose it's also a cultural thing. For us, miracles have sort of just become associated, almost like synonymous with magic. Like we'd probably call it magic, and we'd probably not so much call it a miracle. Miracle seems more traditional, even in its language and its implications. Yeah. But let's say, something, I don't know why you went with a flowery bat, but let's say you conjure something.
It was either a flower or a bat, but hey, let's combine them.
I amalgamated it just to, but yeah, let's say something, conjure something, you're talking about magic. And then, subhanAllah, Usman, you're talking about speech, and there's a beautiful hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ, he says that inna min al-bayani lasihra, that indeed a part of speech is magic. SubhanAllah, like some speech is as effective as magic.
Because it moves the hearts and the minds, it changes people's actions and opinions, it can change lives. It's incredible what speech can do. And I guess just an observation, sorry, Sufyan, an observation as well is that I guess, we the subtitle in this podcast was God's Word in a Godless World. And the thing is, we're in a very material world. And one of the key parts of this world, this dunya as it's shaped now, is seeing is believing, right? That whole mantra, seeing is believing. And if you don't see, you don't believe. So we prioritize that immediate material impact at the expense of other things. So then speech is degraded. Everything else, all your other senses, all your other rational faculties are put aside because, hey, seeing is believing. So I think that kind of plays into us maybe not appreciating the miracle of speech as we should.
Absolutely.
I guess that sort of takes us on to the next sort of question or issue to explore, which is that element of being mesmerized by something, right? What was it about the Qur'an that actually mesmerized the Quraysh, that actually had that effect on the Quraysh? And maybe if you can give us some examples of from your studies.
So this is where it truly gets fascinating, and this is where, as Muslims, as people who profess to this sacred text, this transcendent revelation, this is where, I'm yet still to kind of explore this in a studious way And what is it? The question that why were they so mesmerized? And the fact that they were mesmerized in such a way, it begs a lot of questions in terms of why aren't we mesmerized?
No, absolutely.
And so we'll look at some examples. Number one, just on the miracle, we'll go back really quickly because it relates to this. In Arabic, it's mu'ajaza, a miracle, right? And it comes from the word i'jaz or ajaza. Okay, so we call this study a'jaz al-Qur'an, the incapacitating power of the Qur'an. So the root word ajaza is got to do with to incapacitate someone, to bring them to their knees, to totally bring someone to surrender. And that's exactly what the mushrikeen of Mecca felt. They were completely overtaken and, like you mentioned, Sufyan, mesmerized by the kalam, the mode, the structure, like I said, the symmetry, the complex, organization of the Qur'an. And we have examples with the seerah, all throughout the seerah for this. And the most amazing thing is there were involuntary actions. And when you have an involuntary action by someone reacting to something, it just further tells you how powerful it was. And we all know that, when the Prophet ﷺ started reciting Qur'an publicly in the Kaaba, he was reciting Surah Najm, and this is famous in the Seerah, and Surah Najm has an ayah of sajda, sujood.
Yep.
And we all know that the mushrikeen of Mecca fell into prostration, right? So power, dominance, control, and we have stories of, this is before Abu Sufyan accepted Islam. We had Abu Jahl, Abu Sufyan, and the leaders secretly always trying to listen to the Prophet ﷺ recite the Qur'an. And there's a famous story where, they would listen at night continuously and they ran into one another. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that one.
I'm sure that would have been an incredibly awkward meeting.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
What were you doing here? I wasn't listening to the Qur'an.
Yeah, that's right. And, they ran into each other not once, but twice and thrice. And so there was something that was really drawing them in. But the third example, which I'll quickly run through, was a very famous example in the seerah. That was 𝗬𝗓𝗵𝗂𝗏. And so this is when the Qur'an was becoming, in their perspective, a public nuisance, right? So they had to really get it out of the public side because it was so powerful and it was just taking the hearts away. So they hired 𝗬𝗓𝗵𝗂𝗏, which his command of Arabic was exceptional. His status, he accumulated wealth. He was someone of, great status amongst the Quraysh. Even the leaders such as Abu Jahl would come to him and.
Are we talking generally sort of as a person or specifically with Arabic or a bit of both?
Okay, so his influence was quite the celebrity. He was well known in the courts of the Roman emperor, the Abyssinian king, the Persian king. So he went around business, Arabic, poetry. He had the whole package. So he was hired to speak to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? To see if he could do some control. And we all know the famous story where he went and he offered the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he spoke to him, and just to move through the story fast, and the Prophet ﷺ responded in Surah 𝗂𝗓𝗏, as we all know. And the reaction and the dominance, like I mentioned, the i'jaz, the way it incapacitates the hearts was amazing. He, to one extent, Abu Sufyan narrated this after he became a Muslim because he was amongst the audience watching. So that was kind of like they hired him.
Yeah.
He had to stop the Prophet ﷺ, put his hand over his mouth. There was involuntary tears. And he came back a man who was completely changed. And, it's been narrated that he looked even differently. He looked different. He changed his composure. He was a man that truly, it's funny saying this, but I guess he did experience a miracle, right?
He must have. To have that profound an impact on a human being, it's not normal, so to speak.
Was it, can you share, was it like the first couple of ayat of the surah, or was it?
So according to some narrations, it was ayah 1 to 13. Okay. It was just past the part where sort of 𝗬𝗓𝗏 talks about the punishment that came to Ad, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically, gives a domination to the Quraysh, as in this kind of punishment could come. But he returned, and this was a disaster. It was a public disaster because he was on show. He was on show. Can you imagine him walking back? And then everyone sees this figure that's been dominated. Anyway, so just to cut it short, there was a crisis meeting held, and he needed to hold a press conference the next day. You know, just to give a formal statement as his true position. All right. So the press conference was recorded in 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗟𝗵𝗂 where he said,
because you called it a press conference, it almost sounded like you were going to say it was broadcast by CNN and BBC and everything else.
Because you know what, it was damage control, right?
Yeah.
So it was a little bit too late. So he comes out and he says, you know, فَقَالَ إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗂𝗂𝗃. Guys, this is nothing but, you know, ancient magic, right? And then, you know what I find so fascinating, Sufyan, you mentioned magic before as well. What I find so fascinating, whenever the Quraysh associated the Qur'an with magic, they were inadvertently acknowledging its transcendence.
It's like admitting defeat.
Yeah, because, I mean, okay, so what do you call magic? You don't call magic something that sounds smart. You call something magic because the Quraysh could simply not characterize any part of Rasulullah's recitation of the Quran with human speech. They
can't explain
it. They couldn't match it. So, in a way, they were acknowledging transcendence, because transcendence is something that's not within the human capability, right? So inadvertently, they were acknowledging transcendence. And very interesting, he said, فَقَالَ إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗂𝗃. So this is magic. The very ayah after that, he says, إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا قَوْلُ الْبَشَرِ. It's kind of like, hang on, I've just called it magic. I've actually made the problem worse because I'm actually praising it in a way. So let me
backtrack a little bit.
Yeah. And let me just say, in هذا إلا قول البشر instead. Actually, it's not magic, 'cause that's still something. It's just the word of a human being.
Yeah, beautiful.
SubhanAllah.
It's like the first statement, SubhanAllah, is like you're saying, you know, when you refer to something as magic, essentially what you're doing is you're attributing a supernatural element to it.
Exactly.
And then when you think, hang on, if I've just called it supernatural, that might, you know, link it to the divine.
So let me just point.
Absolutely.
Let me just quickly backtrack and say what I meant.
I retract that statement. I officially retract that statement. But
that's right.
Just imagine, I think sometimes because we're very we're caught up in our own spheres, in our own day and age, I feel like sometimes we don't fully appreciate just how incredibly powerful that kind of example is. And not just that, all the examples that you mentioned, because it's like those individuals, that group, that society had every political reason to just shut it down, to not submit, right? They had, like you were saying, right, they had their PR on show, they had everything going, right? They had to project themselves as being superior, every incentive to not submit, right?
Absolutely.
And then suddenly they have absolutely no option, but as you mentioned, an involuntary submission. That's incredible. Like just imagine you've got Palestinians, Israelis, and then some Palestinians just speak. They just say something, and the Israelis turn around and run home. And they're shaken, and they say, we can't do this, we can't do this. Like, imagine the world witnessing that.
Absolutely.
It would be incredible. We'd say, whoa, this is not normal. And that's the kind of thing that they experienced.
Just to chime in here a little bit, and not to take away from the grandeur of the Qur'an itself, and its magnificence by giving an example that is not worthy of it. But we talk about today, in our day and age, we can't really appreciate it because we have different sort of terms of reference. I watched being into poetry myself, I have a love and an appreciation for language. And I watched a documentary many years ago on a famous Urdu poet. And there's a scene in it. And obviously
your video looks frozen. Anyway, go ahead. Perhaps it'll
we can still hear you. That's fine.
Okay. So this is actually 19, let's say early 19 or mid 1990s production, and it's obviously the setting of it is because it's talking about a poet from like the 17th or 18th century. So they've obviously constructed the setting like, accordingly. And there's a scene in here in which they talk about a poet and how he's trying to make it big. He's trying to make it in the world, because that's his career. So he comes in and he reads off a piece of paper. And the reason he's there in that majlis, in that sitting, is because someone has summoned him and said that he's actually saying, he's casting aspersions, he's criticizing the disciple of the king. So this disciple calls him in and he says, well, now read your poetry in front of the king. What were you saying about me? So he's kind of summoned him. And he's, subhanAllah, like, it's so interesting. The poet reads his poetry, which is criticizing him. And despite the criticism, the person who summoned him ends up saying, vah, vah, appreciating. Like he can't help himself. The praise just flows out of his mouth, So it's like, subhanAllah, that's one representation of and it had to be a traditional, historical, because nowadays that sort of mesmerization or fascination over, forget divine speech, but even like poetry, it's just not commonplace anymore.
Absolutely.
I almost feel, just to clarify the point I'm trying to make, is that I almost feel that we need a fundamental change in the way that we recognize and form meaning and appreciate beauty to be able to even register the beauty of the Qur'an itself. Like it's not the Qur'an, it's us. SubhanAllah. We need to fundamentally reconfigure ourselves, SubhanAllah, to be able to appreciate
it as the miracle is there. That's timeless. It has been there, will be there, remains there. But who are the ones receiving it? I guess that's the big question. And that's, I guess, leads into the next point of discussion. Why, Usman, why is it important that we talk about this? Like, we as Muslims, we have a familiarity with the Qur'an, right? It's, been in our household, subhanAllah, adorns the walls even. Perhaps that's not a great thing at times if you don't even give it its due attention. But why is this miracle of the Qur'an so critically important for us to talk about?
Yep, so great question. And I think somewhat, I can't really, my experiences may not necessarily reflect reality, but, growing up, I really didn't hear much about the linguistic miracle of the Qur'an.
Yeah.
That may just be because of my limited kind of exposure, but
I think that's you could probably say that's, I don't know, look, it was definitely for me as well and the youth around us at the time when we were growing up. We're still young, by the way. It wasn't really focused on it. It was like, yes, you're meant to read the Qur'an, you're meant to, even reading it was like step one, yeah? And then if you can understand it, be it through the translation or some other means, that's like the bonus, right? That's extra. But then to understand its depth as a miracle is almost not really within the picture.
Absolutely. I want to take you to one ayah in Surah Baqarah. And it's beautiful. So basically it's where Ibrahim 𝗟𝗏 says, إِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. So Ibrahim 𝗟𝗏 asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I want to see كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى, how you bring life, from death, how you resurrect. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds by saying, قَالَ أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ, what, Ibrahim, do you not believe? Now, Ibrahim 𝗟𝗏's reply is what is so deep. He says, قَالَ بَلَى, yes, absolutely I do. وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. So he says, Ya Allah, I do believe, but I want to witness this miracle so as for the satisfaction of my heart. So the Prophet, so that tells you about the implication of, or maybe you could even say the necessity to some degree of a believer experiencing a miracle, because it's a way where you could say you graduate from basic belief to وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي, as Ibrahim 𝗟𝗏 said, to a belief that is more satisfying and more sweet.
And it's like that seal, it stamps the belief. It's like, that's it. There's actually nothing else. There is no other thing. There's no other reality. This is it. This belief is the be all and end all.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I mentioned, if you look at the three levels of faith, you have Islam, Iman, and Ihsan, right?
Yeah.
A Muslim, mu'min, basically. And I feel that, a miracle, experiencing a miracle, just, you kind of get pushed through these levels. And then it makes it a lot easier to reach Ihsan when you experience this. And although this miracle is somewhat different because it has to almost be unlocked. And I want to bring it back to Sufyan, what you just said about changing the culture, right? It's almost as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has intended that He wants this nation to have a connection with academia and literature and writing, because the more you have that connection, the more you unlock this miracle. So it's kind of tied in with study. It's almost tied in with this culture of learning literature.
Yeah.
So that's one reason why, as Muslims, we need to really be able to access this miracle, and especially in today's day and age, where we literally, we say we need a miracle.
That's true. That's true. So what about? Okay, so we've had a fairly decent discussion about sort of the elements of what a miracle is, the Qur'an, its language, and so forth. But what about some sort of authorities in the field or scholarship that ties it all together? Like, what can we take from it? Because especially those who might not have that sort of access to the Arabic language, I guess as much as we all should, how can we come to acknowledge or appreciate? Because let's say we as Muslims, we want to, as you said, Usman, graduate to that next level, right? Have that firm belief and that undeniable conviction. Mm-hmm. What can help us? Are there examples, authorities in the field, something that can push us in that direction?
Yeah, look, you'll be surprised. There's actually quite a bit of work that has been done in this field. The problem is a lot of it's not translated. There hasn't been much kind of bridging that into English. But some modern scholars, you have Mustansir Mir, he's done quite a bit of work in symmetry and coherence. You have Imam Hamiduddin Farahi, he did the work Nizam al-Qur'an, coherence in the Qur'an. But, what fascinated me was the work of Dr. Raymond Fahren. And Dr. Raymond Fahren, I'll give you a quick background of him. He was an American, right? He still lives
he's no longer an American? Did he revoke his citizenship or something?
Alhamdulillah, yeah. So he's American, and he started his journey studying literature. He had a fascination for English literature, a deep fascination. Anyway, his scholarship meant, subhanAllah, the plans of Allah. So his scholarship meant that he had to serve in the Navy for a little while. Yeah. The Navy, to cut it short, the Navy goes to Egypt. He's fascinated by Arabic, absolutely blown away. He takes intensive classes. He gets a little bit of a stronghold in Arabic, goes back home, and he decides to explore Arabic more. He goes to Kuwait, and before you know it, he basically is studying for his master's in Arabic, classical Arabic literature. And obviously when you study Arabic, one of the fundamental texts are the Qur'an.
Yeah.
And then when his Arabic came to a level where he could kind of see the structure and you could say the foundation of the verses and the composition, it blew him away. Mashallah, he went on and to become a professor in Arabic at the University of Kuwait. So,
wow.
And so he accepted Islam. He came to the conclusion that this cannot be the word of a human being. This is not this speech does not resemble anything that humans possess. Anyway, he
so it's like what you were saying. He experienced the miracle.
Subhanallah, he was
to some extent.
Yeah.
Go on, Sufyan.
No, I was just wondering. I think that's a name. Inshallah, we can go in and look into it. But what extent do you think he would have been able to? So how you say today we're quite distant from the language. In the past, the Arabs themselves are masters of the language. Now you have 1,000, 1,400, whatever years later, you have someone who's tried to sort of get back as close as possible to understanding and appreciating the language. To what extent do you think someone like that would appreciate the miracle?
Look, in terms of Dr. Raymond Fahren, right?
Yeah.
You're asking? Just clarify.
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so it certainly goes a long way in terms of accepting this as a divine book from a divine source, and that would definitely mean that he could further see. You have to remember the miracle kind of starts almost at that point. So it's kind of like a starting point, and which we'll touch on later, inshallah, if we explore some other areas. But I think for him, it's just a starting point, and that meant from that point he actually, he did some rigorous study and he published a book, and that's the examples which I'm gonna inshallah use as my source as well. He studied a book called Symmetry and Coherence in the Qur'an, where because the greatest criticism from Orientalists and Western academia of classical Arabic, the greatest criticism, look, they acknowledge that at a verse level, it's brilliant. They acknowledge that it has deeply embedded complex structures and all these literary qualities. But the biggest criticism was there's no substance in structure. Like, maybe they haphazardly just, one verse saying this, another verse saying that. And that's very important because as Muslims reading the Quran, we may experience something similar, right? So his explicit study was to show, hang on, this can't be furthest from the truth. The symmetry and the thematic connection is what makes it truly miraculous. So his study was on the symmetry and the ring composition, which I'm going to, inshallah, later go into, how the Quran is so phenomenally organized that you find all these beautiful patterns and these rich, complex structures that are not incoherent, but rather exemplary in their coherence.
Well, let's just get into it then. What are some of these examples that we can furnish?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we'll do a selection. What I want to focus on, just for the audience as well, I won't go into any examples that require, too much knowledge of grammar.
Just so whatever you find compelling.
Okay, so what I find compelling is a ring structure.
Yeah.
So we have the themes organized in a chiasma structure. So a chiasma structure is when you have content or you have a thematic link where the first portion thematically matches the last, the second matches the second last, third last, fourth last, and you sometimes have a middle section. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So Dr. Raymond Fahren, basically his research suggests that the entire Quran consists of rings. So you have ayahs that have this ring structure. You have surahs that have this ring structure, and then the entire Quran. So you have circles within circles. So I'm going to share an ayah that has this structure. So we'll delve into the ayat al-Kursi, the verse of the throne. So let's just analyze it really quickly. So the first part of ayat al-Kursi, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayy al-qayyum. So al-hayy al-qayyum. So it's talking about Allah's sifat. The last part, وَهُوَ الْعَلِيُّ الْعَظِيمُ. Al-Ali and Azim. So sifa, right? So we're starting this ring structure. Let's go to the second part. لَا تَأْخُذُهُ سِنَةٌ وَلَا نَوْمٌ. Sleep nor slumber does overtake Allah. The second last, وَلَا يَؤُودُهُ حِفْظُهُمَا. Right? He does not tire in the preservation of the heavens and the earth. Third part, لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. To him belongs the heavens and the earth. The third last part, وَسِعَ كُرْسِيُّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Right? His kursi expands over the heavens and the earth. And then we close in by لَا تَأْخُذُهُ سِنَةٌ وَلَا نَوْمٌ. مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يَشْفَعْ عِنْدَهُ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ. That no one can gain intercession without his permission. The fourth last part, وَلَا يُحِيطُونَ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنْ عِلْمِهِ إِلَّا بِمَا شَاءَ. So no one can take from his knowledge without his permission. Right? So you have permission. And then most beautifully, in a spectacular fashion, you have the middle, very middle, يَعْلَمُ مَا بَيْنَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَمَا خَلْفَهُمْ. So he knows what's before them and after them. And notice that's strategically placed in the middle. So the middle of something is between what's after and what's before. So you have this beautiful, amazing ring structure in Ayat al-Kursi. So we can, but what really strikes me, and we have a special guest with us. We have a guest, alhamdulillah. Let's delve into the next example, shall we? And this is from Surah Yusuf, right? So Surah Yusuf. Everyone, Surah Yusuf impresses just everyone in a different way. But what struck me, so this was my first exposure to chiasmus, to the ring structure. That's why I've got a special fascination with it. So thematically, the story of Yusuf AlIslam, it's not a story that the Prophet ﷺ wrote and some sort of fairy tale. It's actually events in the life of Yusuf AlIslam. So the way that Allah narrates it is amazing. So let's observe the ring structure in Surah Yusuf.
Yeah.
First, you have the dream. إِذْ قَالَ يُوسُفْ لِأَبِيهِ يَا أَبَتِ إِنِّي رَأَيْتُ أَحَدَ عَشْرَ كَوْكَبًا, where Yusuf AlIslam as a young boy sees a dream. Right, that's the very first kind of major theme. The very last major theme, all right, if you go back all the way to the bottom, so reading ring structure, is Yusuf AlIslam says, you know, when he raises his father on the arsh, وَرَفَعَ أَبَوَيْهِ عَلَى الْعَرْشِ وَخَرُّوا لَهَا سُجَّدًا وَقَالَ يَا أَبَتِ هَذَا تَأْوِيلُ رُؤْيَايَ مِنْ قَبْلِ قَدْ جَعَلَ رَبِّهَا حَقًّا. He says to his father that, you know, this is the interpretation of the dream I saw when I was a young boy. And then he said, قَدْ جَعَلَ رَبِّي حَقًّا, that my Lord has definitely made this dream manifest into reality. So dream.
Yeah.
What's the second thing that happens in the story? His brothers plot against him. Uqtulu Yusuf, let's kill him. Then they said, no, la taqtulu Yusuf wa alquhu fi ghayabati al-jub. We won't kill him, we'll throw him down.
Yeah.
So that's the plot. And the very kind of second last thing is the brothers asked for forgiveness against the plot, right? They admit to the mistake. They said, لَقَدْ آثَرَكَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا وَإِن كُنَّا لَخَاطِئِينَ. Like, Allah has preferred you over us, and we've definitely failed. So we've got a structure. The next thing is Yusuf AlIslam is seduced, right? Well, the king's wife tries to seduce Yusuf AlIslam. The third last thing is her admission, right? Her admission. She says, قُلْنَا حَاشَ لِلَّهِ مَا عَلِمْنَا عَلَيْهِ مِنْ سُوءٍ. Like, you know, I know nothing ill of Yusuf AlIslam. أَنَا رَاوَدتُّهُ عَنْ نَفْسِي. Like, it was me that tempted him. The fourth thing is Yusuf AlIslam enters jail. وَدَخَلَ مَعَهُ السِّجْنَ فَتَيَانٍ. Right? He enters jail. The fourth last thing is he basically is exempt and he's released from jail. Right? Then the fifth thing is وَقَالَ الْمَلِكِ إِنِّي أَرَى. And, you know, to the end of the ayah, the Malik, the king, sees a dream of the 7 fat cows getting eaten by the 7 skinny cows, etc. The symmetrical connection, the fifth last thing is Yusuf AlIslam interprets the dream. So we have this amazing ring composition, as I've just clearly laid out, where thematically you have absolutely beautiful coherence, symmetry, and connection. Can I just also point out that it's not only the ring structure that makes it beautiful, you have simultaneous other structures going on in the background. And I want to give you one example. This is just like, it blows me away. So you have a ring structure going on, but simultaneously you have a linear progression of themes as well, right? Just to make it exponentially more miraculous. So I'll give you 2 examples of that. The shirt in Yusuf AlIslam's story is a symbol that kind of traces its way through the surah in a linear fashion. The first incident with the shirt was وَجَاءُوا عَلَى قَمِيصِهِ بِدَمٍ كَذِبٍ. They bought a shirt with false blood on it, right? That was the first instance. The second use of the shirt was a test. إِنْ كَانَ قَمِيصُهُ قُدَّ مِنْ قُبُلٍ. Like, if the shirt is ripped from the back, he's guilty. If it's ripped from the back, he's innocent, right? Then the final use of the shirt was اذهبوا بقميصي هذا فألقوه على وجه أبي يأتي بصيرا. That Yusuf says, take my shirt and put it over my father's face and he'll be able to see. So you have the beautiful linear progression of themes. And I'm just going to finish off with one more from Surah Yusuf. And that is contrast. So beautiful. In the Surah Yusuf AlIslam, you have 2 meetings of the brothers. The meeting at the start where they all got together and said, you know what? Inna abana lafi dhalalin mubin. Our father is not thinking right. You know, he loves Yusuf more. Let's kill him. So the first meeting was to destroy Yusuf. And at the end of the surah, when Binyamin's caught, فَلَمَّا اسْتَيْأَسُوا مِنْهُ خَلَصُوا نَجِيًّا قَالَ كَبِيرُهُم. The oldest of them, right, holds the meeting into how to save the brother Binyamin. And he says, you know, فَلَنْ أَبْرَحَ الْأَرْض حَتَّى يَأْذَنَ لِي أَبِي. Like, I'm not moving from here until we find out a way to save. So we have this beautiful contrast as well.
That's That's heavy. That's structures within structures. And you know what genuinely astounds me is that this came from an unlettered man, a man who was not sort of known or well versed in language or poetry or artistry and eloquence, but he was known for his eloquence in terms of his style of speech, but here he was, off the cuff, you could say, for those who don't believe that it's revelation,
of course,
off the cuff, coming up with this structure and just sort of accidentally making it this way. And that, like you said, Usman, that's in a few examples you've shown of one particularly miraculous structure, but then if you look in other examples, you've got things like palindromes and other structural sort of miracles, really, that you cannot fathom just accidentally emerge when you speak. Like imagine, like your earlier example, right? We transcribed this entire podcast and we realized that what we've been saying at the beginning is mirroring what we say at the end.
Absolutely.
Like, imagine that, like someone to tell us that we accidentally did that is unfathomable. It's ridiculous. It'd have to be meticulously planned and done or come from some other source. But it's just mind-blowing, yeah.
As a side note, like again, just listening to those beautiful explanations, something I'd like to get into or try and explore a little bit more is the effect of that, because it's unclear to me. That connection, it remains a bit unclear. Like I can understand the arrangement aspect of it, how that's miraculous, that it can't have been randomly, because the Prophet ﷺ used to basically recite ayat in response to specific questions or events that were taking place before him. And that makes it even more miraculous that the arrangement was not actually, he didn't sit in one place and recite the whole surah, and often it wasn't an entire surah that was revealed. It was often ayat that were revealed, So that makes it additionally, because it's like there's a specific cause for why an ayat or a part of the surah is being revealed and so forth. But in terms of, when we talk about miracles today and the effect of the miracle on the heart, I wonder if, there's been work done on what kind of effect does it have a specific effect on the human heart and the human mind? Where you're reading and, it looks like problems are being presented and then in that ring structure, they're being resolved. Does that have a specific miraculous impact on the heart in terms of fahm, in terms of understanding the Qur'an? So I imagine there's been some work on that, Usman.
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. And I remember you asked me that once, like maybe last year when we were just having a casual chat about that.
Yeah.
I'll try to address that, but I want to share just a few more examples as well, smaller examples.
Yeah.
But before that, I'll address that. Look, as mentioned earlier, it has that effect on the heart, as in 𝗼𝕬𝗂𝗏 𝗟𝒃, as in the sweetness of faith. But for me, I used to always hear you should ponder over the Qur'an. You should study the Qur'an. And even Allah subhanahu says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Don't you reflect over the Qur'an?
Yeah.
And obviously there's various mediums through which you can reflect, you study. And for me, like to read this and to analyze this, and I'll give you a personal story. When I read Dr. Raymond Fahren's book and he mentioned Surah Baqarah is in a chiasm structure, and I was like, no way, Surah Baqarah.
Yeah.
And he gave a very brief outline of Surah Baqarah. So what I did was, I think this was 3 or 4 Ramadans ago, I spent every night trying to find this as pointed out by Dr. Raymond Fahren, right? And that experience, which, obviously we don't have time to go over that sort of Baqarah today, but that was so mind-blowing when I was trying to... So Dr. Raymond Fahren pointed out like certain sections that relate. But within those sections, I found like this chiasma structure. And, for example, early on, the challenge was given to the disbelievers, فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ in Surah Baqarah. And the corresponding section, you have the challenge to Namrud. So I was finding all these amazing connections, and that in itself, that experience it's almost revelatory. Like when you study and they surface up, like these the kind of.
And I suppose it's like, it depends on a person's understanding. Like if a person knows Surah Baqarah really well, and then, someone who studied it and has a professor in the language of the Qur'an comes and makes a point about it, the pieces of the puzzle will come together,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like I said, there's requisites to appreciating a miracle.
Yeah,
it's not like every Joe Blow is going to come and appreciate the miracle of the Qur'an.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, can I just also point out, with these ring structures and these, we have to be very careful that we cannot enforce what we want to see in the Qur'an. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, if we're talking about ring structure, chiasmus, and then we're like, you know what? I want this to be a ring structure, right?
And then you just start forcing it into places, yeah.
That's right. So we have to be very, very careful because the Qur'an is its own authority. And we cannot, we cannot put our own predisposition onto the Qur'an. And during this study, that's why those who have the authority kind of lead the way. And for people like me, I'm just astonished and I share what I have found out pretty much.
I guess, one thing that we did want to mention, and we're sort of slightly coming to, and by slightly I mean very much so, coming towards the end of our time. But look, I wanted to just explore a bit about the implications. Like, okay, let's presume now that we've understood this is miraculous. And by that we mean, and like, you almost have to stop and just sort of reflect on this as you're saying it. We mean that this speech that we recite comes from outside of this universe, this dunya, this reality. It comes from an otherworldly realm, a supreme being. Like that, if we digest it, is just utterly astonishing. And the question that arises for me is that, what should the implications be? Like, something so huge can't just stay on bookshelves or, as I said before, be adorned on walls and the walls of masajid and whatnot, as beautiful as it may look in, calligraphy and whatnot. But that's got to move us, surely. That's got to do something huge. Like, Usman, I remember we were talking earlier about something that you could, arguably say is less miraculous, so to speak. But when someone has a child, right, and they experience that, and, often it's described as miraculous, maybe not in the exact same sense, but it is something moving, right? And people will readjust their entire lives, their perspectives, their mindset, their priorities, everything when they have that child, because it means something so fundamentally shifting in their lives. But do we have that reaction with the Qur'an? Like, that, I think, is a really telling question, and it's something that I guess individuals need to ask themselves. We can't answer that question. It should move us. I think that's the simple answer. But I guess this is more of a rant-reflection on how, I guess, it doesn't really move us as it should. And that should really make us ponder, really make us think. Like, someone, as I said before, conjures something in front of you. You'd be blown away. It would move you. It would alter you. It would, change you. But when we read this 5 times a day in our salah, if only that, does it hit us with every verse and every word and every surah that this is from the Creator? And it's so astonishingly powerful, but something I feel personally deeply overlooked, unfortunately. I don't know, maybe that's just me. Maybe I feel like it's overlooked. Maybe it's underappreciated.
That's a really
maybe I'm just ranting. No, it's not depressing. It's more like,
there's a question there.
It's kind of like we need to step it up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We need to really take what this is. And I don't know, I'm going to, if I may have permission from my co-host and dear guest, I'm going to slightly extend this rant to just implicate the rest of society in this gross denial of the miracle. Like, how can our world sit aside and not rush to have this in practice? How can we as Muslims, as an ummah, not rush to make this Qur'an, this miracle, be implemented and realized and apparent in every single way it can be. Because just as, these verses move us as individuals, these verses should shake the entire world, should shake the dunya, should shake the universe. Indeed, they come from the creator of the universe. So when Allah legislates even one aspect of law, it is a crime beyond belief for that not to be present in this world. And truly we need to hold ourselves to account. End rant.
Just a really quick comment on that. If you look at the 4 prophetic functions that the Prophet ﷺ had, job description, يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ, all right, to recite over them the verses, وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, to purify them, وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابِ, teach them the book, وَالْحِكْمَةِ, and the hikmah. Now, يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ, I was reading, some scholarly discourse on that, and they're saying, يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ, in this prophetic mission can also be seen as a process of transformation of an individual and community. So the miraculous nature of the Qur'an fits in يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ. In a way, it's kind of like the first step is to be wowed, to be taken away from this Qur'an, ayati. Like, I know we say verse, it's truly, we use the word verse in English, but it's nothing close to what a verse is. It's a miraculous sign. Each one is a miraculous sign. To be blown away is the first step, I guess, for us to take what you're saying more seriously. And you're right, the implications are huge. We have professed that this book is transcendent, it's from a divine origin. And then from that point onwards, what are the implications? Huge. It's something that requires a lot of thinking on an individual and community level, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, look, I think we are sort of getting to the end of our session. Perhaps, Sufyan, I'll invite if there's anything that you'd like to sort of add before we conclude, and then Usman, maybe yourself, any final thoughts and reflections?
Yeah, look, I just think beautiful discussion. There's a few things that are I think that are mulling over as a result. Because it's one of those conversations where it's not like in our typical episode we talk about a current event and the analysis for it. But this is one of those topics that everyone, we try and have a really personal relationship with, to try and understand at a personal level, because the Quran's for all of us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to us directly. And so lots of questions and commentary brewing. But maybe we can see a second chapter to this episode for more conversation.
Perhaps we can do that. Inshallah.
I really appreciate you coming, Usman, and sharing your thoughts with us and sharing the fruits of many years of research and reading with us. It's beautiful. It's very moving, and it's very inviting for us to come and sort of study at that level as well, and trying to appreciate and reflect at that level as well.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for your time, Usman. I will ask you though, any last concluding thoughts, any remarks that you'd want to drop before we conclude?
Look, you did say to me at the start that time will fly, and you were so right, because I almost feel it was rude to ask for more examples, but maybe next time I have so many more mind-blowing, unbelievable examples to share, which we didn't get time today, which I thought I would, but that's what happens in conversations. Maybe next time. But look, I'm just gonna invite everyone to try to truly reflect what the Quran means for you, and to try to start the journey of establishing a personal relationship with the Quran. And this is one medium through which you can establish that connection. And I just want to say, for example, the examples I provided, there was no prerequisite of any deep Arabic. So a lot of people can start engaging in finding out these linguistic miracles, and therefore use that as an excuse to engage and to reflect. And therefore, who knows, subhanAllah, and then maybe use that as a means to start learning Arabic, and then one day even publishing books for anyone. Why not?
Inshallah, have your own
to share that
Raymond journey.
Beautiful. Yep, absolutely.
All right, well, we will leave it at that, inshallah. Jazakallah khair to all those who tuned in. Once again, massive Jazakallah khair to Brother Usman Malik for gracing us with his time, presence, reflections, and knowledge. Thank you all for listening. And once again, as we do, if you've stuck around till the end, then hopefully you've found some goodness and benefit. And please do sign up or like our socials and everything else, Facebook, Instagram. Stay up to date, inshallah. We are on every fortnight at, well, it was 7:30, but 7:45 because of Maghrib now. It would be fantastic for you to tune in next week as well. But on that, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.